Okay, to anyone who has joined us already, with 1 minute out, and we'll begin the session shortly. Okay, um, I will begin the session. Okay, I will now begin the session. Should more people join in, they can just join in from the get-go. All right then. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's unique webinar on blended learning, harnessing the power of hybrid education. Proudly presented by Joe, as well as Dr. Delia Dumitrica. A short introduction to myself. My name is Mayuri, and I will be your host and facilitator for this informative session. Before we dive into the discussions, I wanted to extend a warm welcome to all our attendees. Whether you're joining us from the Netherlands or anywhere around the world, your presence here is greatly appreciated, and we are excited to have you on this virtual platform with us. Blended learning has emerged as a transformative force in education, offering a combination of traditional classroom teaching as well as online tools to create a more engaging and effective learning experience. Today, we will delve deep into this topic, explore its benefits, best practices, and its impact on education in the Netherlands and beyond. Before we get started, I will take a moment to introduce our distinguished panelist who will be sharing her insights with us today, Dr. Delia Dumitrica. Dr. Delia Dumitrica is an associate professor in political communications at Erasmus University Rotterdam. As an active educational innovator, she is the recipient of the 2021 Comius Senior Fellowship for the project Advanced Adaptive Digital Environments for Qualitative Research and Learning. She is also a past fellow for the Community of Learning and Innovation at EUR. Her educational research has appeared in the Qualitative Report and About Campus. We are honored to have her speak today and share her wealth of knowledge and experience on this topic. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to stay, to actively engage with us. You can submit your questions and comments in the chat, and we will address them during our Q&A session towards the end. Without further ado, let's invite Dr. Delia to begin her presentation. I think she will just start by sharing the screen, which she's already, so we can just begin.
Thank you very much, Mayuri. I hope the connection is good and everyone can hear me. And thank you for the introduction. I think that my presentation will be around, well, it was timed and it was 15 minutes, but you know how it is when you're actually presenting, suddenly time you lose track of time. So hopefully I will not go more than 20 minutes, leaving plenty of time for discussion, and hopefully members of the audience can ask questions or add to the presentation today. As Mayuri has mentioned, the presentation is based on work facilitated by a Comenius Senior Fellowship that I was awarded in 2021, and that I have implemented with the help of my my colleague, Dr. Naomi Oosterman, so I'm also presenting on her behalf. Now, the work in question consists of designing and implementing a set of digital resources for our students across bachelor, pre-master, and master programs. In this presentation for today, I have two goals. I hope to introduce the principles that have informed our intervention and the recipe behind our digital resources. And second, I would like to showcase some of the challenges that we encountered in using these digital resources, but also the student perception of these materials. So why digital resources? From our students' point of view, the complexity of the content that we introduce makes it very hard to understand. In our case, the content in question pertains to qualitative methods of analysis in the social sciences, which our students often experience as confusing. Furthermore, because applying this content requires interpretation on the part of the researcher, our students often feel that it's a subjective process, that anything goes. They are afraid to start the process of analysis and often demand some clear-cut recipes for how to do things. Importantly, our students need this content at different stages of their program. And we have anecdotal evidence that suggests they often forget some of this content from one course to the next. Faculty, on the other hand, struggle with having to introduce students to a lot of content over the time span of only 8 weeks, which is the duration of a term for us. Now, this leaves very little time for us to verify that our students have gained in-depth understanding of the topic and for providing additional opportunities for them to actually apply the knowledge. So our project translated these initial problems into a set of goals and principles for designing digital resources. We wanted our digital resources to offer a complete learning experience. Now, this meant that these digital resources had to provide students with knowledge gaining, application of this knowledge in practice, feedback on how solid the application was, as well as an opportunity to reflect on what worked and didn't. We also wanted these digital resources to be self-contained, meaning learning had to happen without a faculty member present, reviewing the work and providing feedback in a synchronous manner. In this way, the resources could be both integrated within a course and offered as an additional learning resource that students could consult on their own time. Finally, we know that nobody learns in just one course. Learning happens throughout the span of an entire program and entails repetition and rehearsing of the material. This is why we wanted these resources to reactivate and sediment knowledge and skill at different moments in a study program. We translated these goals into 4 design principles that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. Incremental scaffolding meant that each component of our digital resources moved students from knowledge formation to practical application, then reflection. Simple and concise knowledge meant that our digital resources were adapted to the specificity of the medium. For instance, we relied on colorful visualizations, we used very short texts and very short videos. Interactivity and practical learning meant that our digital resources had to allow students to apply knowledge to concrete cases. Then we offered insight into how experts would have done the same type of work. Now, this particular element opens the black box of application of applying theory to practice. Finally, our last design principle was reflexivity. We wanted the digital resources to prompt students to think about what they have done and why they have done it that way. To address these problems, we developed and implemented a set of 8 digital resources. The big illustration that you see on the slide is the homepage of one of our courses in our own learning management software, Canvas. You can see the 8 digital resources, and each of them tackles a different topic. For each topic, we also produced 3 different levels of difficulty. Now think of these levels as levels in a game. You start at level 1 and then you move on to the next level and so on. Now each digital resource at each level of difficulty had the exact same structure. And on the right-hand side of the screen, albeit a little bit blurry and not so clear, you can see some screenshots of the different elements that compose a digital resource in Canvas. And I will tell you a little bit more on the structure of a digital resource on the next slide. Importantly, what I wanted to mention here is that we use Canvas as a learning management system, but our digital resources can be easily adapted to and reused in other learning management systems, from Blackboard to Desire to Learn and so on. So I kept on talking about digital resources. So far, I did not define them. Let me try and provide a very brief definition and then explain the structure of a digital resource in the context of our project. Digital resources are relatively small and self-contained materials that provide a learning experience without the synchronous input of a faculty member. For instance, in our intervention, one digital resource was designed to take students a maximum of 1 hour to complete and consisted of the following elements. You can also see them on the slide. Our digital resources always start with knowledge acquisition, and this is done with the help of an in-house developed text that provides the content in a very basic form. This is followed by a video with an expert featured in the entire digital resource, who explains when and how they would use the content in relation to a practical case. In the second stage, students move from knowledge acquisition to knowledge application, and that leads to skill development. Now, this stage consists of a practical activity where, with the help of specific instructions, we guide students to apply the content to a particular case. This is followed by a short video of the expert who undertakes the exact same activity as the students just did, but explains where and why they made certain choices in applying theory to practice. This is the unpacking of the black box of applying theory to practice that I mentioned earlier. Finally, in the last stage of the digital resource, students have an opportunity for self-testing and self-reflection, which is done via a multiple choice quiz and a discussion forum. Now, an important element to point out here is that this sequence is fixed. Our students have no freedom. They have to go from one element to the other in this exact order. In other words, no freedom, right? But as our research pointed out, this was actually an advantage of the recipe behind our digital resources. I mentioned earlier that learning as a process that requires time and repetition was one of our design goals. So we integrated these digital resources in different ways at the different stages of a program of study. In the ideal scenario, students could encounter the first level of a digital resource in the context of a mandatory course, say in year 1. Here, students go through the digital resources before coming to the tutorial, and they know that they will be tested on the knowledge and the skill gained through the use of the digital resource in their final exam. In the tutorial, we start with the input that students have provided in the digital resource. And the goal of the tutorial is then to add depth by discussing this input and by providing a second opportunity for students to apply the knowledge to a practical case. Next, the first and the second levels of a digital resource can be integrated into, say, a research workshop in the second year of the program of study, where, for instance, students need to link theory to practice. And finally, when the thesis writing process starts, we give all students access to an unsupervised Canvas course environment, which contains all 3 levels of a digital resource. Again, going from level 1 to level 2 and level 3 is done sequentially. Students need to unlock the previous level before they can move on. And this is also done to remind them of the levels that they have already seen in the context of courses in year 1 and year 2. In this case, we do not blend these digital resources with tutorial work. If a student needs this material to write their thesis, they can simply go through the digital resources to activate their knowledge and then to improve and complexify this knowledge and to practice with its application in concrete cases. So I have given you a sense of the design principles as well as the structure of our digital resources. Now I want to give you a sense of some of the challenges that we have encountered, but also some of the advantages of these digital resources. On the side of faculty, the integration of these digital resources was hampered by several problems. First of all, faculty has to be willing to take up these digital resources in specific courses, but this also entails workload. And we have noticed that any request for faculty members to integrate new material into their course is balanced by the type of work that will be required of them. Second, in the context of a blended form of education, when you use this type of digital resources and you obtain student input, you need time and you need some effort on the part of the faculty member running the tutorial to gather the material before the tutorial and to bring it to class so that the discussion can start from that input. However, for faculty members who are teaching 2 or 3 tutorials a day, there might simply not be sufficient time to deal with these logistics, so they become a barrier. In the context of offering these resources as additional help, additional material that students could use on their own and at their own pace, so not in the context of a course, but in the context of working on their thesis, for instance, we've noticed that one of the problems had to do with recall on the part of faculty. We always had to let faculty know that the resources were there, that students had access to them, and we had to remind them to let their students know that the resources exist and are at their disposal. Our research showed that when faculty members told their students about these digital resources, even though the students were registered on Canvas to have access to them, when the faculty member brought it up, students actually went to the digital resources and used them. But as you can imagine, it's quite a lot of work to constantly remind your colleagues that these resources are out there for the students at different stages in their thesis writing process. Finally, the last barrier that I want to mention is that colleagues often felt skeptical that such digital resources could tackle complex content and skills. The skepticism also overlapped with the fear that if we continue to use these types of digital resources, management might resort to using them as an excuse for increasing our teaching workload. So there were quite a few fears associated with the use of these digital resources. Now, this is not exactly a challenge related to faculty members, but I wanted to bring it up because I think it's really important for anyone who considers developing digital resources. The cost of doing these digital resources in a professional way is extremely high. And professionalism, in my view, is really important because students come to the university with an already formed digital aesthetic. And if our digital resources do not match these digital these expectations about what's a good digital resource, then students will not be motivated to use them. In our case, the development of such digital resources was overseen by 2 faculty members, myself and Naomi, and it took 2 grants that enabled us to buy out from teaching so that we can develop these resources and implement them, to employ project assistants, and to pay for costs associated with production, such as the use of a professional recording studio, the use of a graphic designer, the use of subtitles, and so on and so forth. And in the end, I should say that both Naomi and I put way more time and effort into these digital resources than our teaching buyouts got us. On the student side, however, these digital resources were very well received. We noticed that bachelor and pre-master students benefited most when these resources were integrated within a course. So blended education was a path for them. They often expected learning to start and end with the digital resource. For instance, they expressed frustration when, after using a digital resource, they felt that they still didn't get it. And they often blamed this on the presumed lack of clarity in the content. For the master students, on the other hand, using these resources at their own pace in a Canvas environment was the way to go. They benefited more from having this freedom. They were also likely to use these resources in a more complex way. And by that, I mean with an awareness of their own role as learners in the process of making sense of the content. They knew that the digital resources have a limited role. They are not exhaustive. They were a first step that would require additional steps on the part of the learner. Now, one surprising finding for us was an overarching concern with visibility. Students were keenly aware of the fact that they didn't know who was going to see their input in the digital resource and what seeing this input would do to their reputation. From where we stood, having students complete tasks and provide an input was crucial to their learning process. Furthermore, we thought that learning from peers by seeing the answers provided by fellow students would actually help them understand that people might make different choices and would help them reflect a little bit more on the motivation behind these choices. But as it turned out, the concern with visibility was an overarching theme across interviews that we have done with the students who have used these digital resources. And finally, based on this interview research that I have just mentioned, we also teased out 3 main advantages of our digital resources. First, our students saw the digital resources as a means of improving their learning practices. And in particular, they talked about the value of being forced, because being forced allowed them to go through the module in a sequential way. It was almost a sort of an example of how to learn, and that was an incentive to do the work. And I have some quotes here that I wanted to show you from the interviews. For instance, one of the participants talked about how their learning routines have not been the best, but with the digital resources, they felt this was improving because these types of digital resources force them to learn and understand the material. And they are asking for more of such digital resources because allegedly their self-discipline is very low. A second advantage had to do with students feeling that digital resources were simplifying the learning process by providing templates, screenshots, and paused videos. So in this context, students felt that these elements facilitated the process of learning. And I want to show you another quote from one of the interviews where a student talks about how the digital modules contain bullet points and important information that breaks the course load down into smaller chunks. So there was this feeling that the digital resources were making more complex content manageable. And finally, students talked about the way in which the practical component of our digital resources helped them clear doubts and cement knowledge. I want to show you a quote for this as well. Since the texts are shorter and immediately followed by an explanatory video, the content is much clearer from the start, and it helps in understanding the concepts in a different way, also because a different perspective is offered through the video. Now, this brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that I have stayed within the promised more like 20 minutes. If you are interested in reading more about advantages and disadvantages of the digital resources, our article is available open access in the qualitative report. If you would like to learn more about these resources, as well as get ideas for how to integrate them into a tutorial, you can check our project website. Finally, if you would be interested in reusing these digital resources, in case you're teaching qualitative research or you know colleagues who are teaching qualitative research in the social sciences, we are happy to share and reuse these resources for free. There is no cost associated with that. We have them, and we would like to make them available to people who could benefit from them. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you for your thought-provoking insights and the discussion, Dr. Delia. Like you mentioned, this session is now open for questions. Actually, because it's a small group, I'll allow all attendees to unmute themselves and also ask questions should they want to. You will now have the ability to unmute yourselves and ask away, or also drop any questions you may have in the chat box below, and I can take them. I'll just wait for a couple minutes should anyone be typing in their questions. Okay, I'll while people are deciding, maybe you're typing in their questions, I actually had a question, Dr. Delia. If you were to include just educational resources, maybe even educational videos as part of one of your digital resources? How could you embed it onto your canvas, or do you already have sections, for example, reading material followed by video content followed by an explanatory video of how to go through the course? Or how would you go about incorporating video resources into this platform?
Yeah, thanks, Mayuri. This gives me an opportunity to say a little bit more on how these modules look like in Canvas. Of course, each and every one of us could be using a different learning management software or system, so things could look slightly different on your end. But a digital learning module in Canvas looks like a set of elements that students see when they open the course environment. So we have a set of instructions. It's a small text. It says, this is what you can expect in a digital resource. Then we have a reading. This is the in-house produced text. So when you click on the link, it opens up a short text that students can read. Then we have the expert videos, and Canvas allows you to upload a video, right? So once you click on the link and you open it up, then you can start the video and you can watch it. You also have subtitles. You can pause the video at any time. Depending on your learning management software, you could have all sorts of functionalities that would allow you as an instructor to maybe ask students a question and ask them to respond to the question before they move on to the next step. Then we have a practical activity. In our case, because we use Canvas, we are lucky enough to be using a specific add-on, which is called Feedback Fruits, which allows you to upload the document and then to annotate the document with questions, open-ended questions or multiple choice questions that students have to then respond to. And that is how the practical activity is done in a digital format. And that immediately is followed by another video. So there is a link and you can click and it opens up a video of the expert who is doing the exact same work that the students have just done. So in that way, students are able to see what they've done and then to compare it to what the expert is doing. And then, of course, you could ask them questions about why there might be any differences or how they could improve now that they have seen the expert video and so on and so forth. If I could just go back, but I don't know if I can, in my presentation. It's a little bit, I didn't realize that the images are not such a good quality. I'm sorry about that. But what you see on the right-hand side, these 3 screenshots are actually screenshots from the Canvas environment. So there is a link, an element that says a reading. And when you click on the reading, then you get this. And then at the bottom of the page, there is a button that says next. So students would click on next and they would go on to the next element in the module. Hopefully this makes a little bit more sense.
So the students will not be able to go through the third screen, say, without going through the second screen, because they will be required to click on next.
Indeed, we force them. This is what we mean by the value of being forced and the lack of freedom. In our case, we do not allow students to skip. Of course, any student can skip. We already know that. But because of this Canvas functionality, we can oblige them to click next before they can go on to the next element of the module. They might see the titles of the elements. They might know that a video is following, but they cannot open it until they do this little click, which is our way of forcing them to go through the material in a sequential manner.
All right. Thank you for answering those questions, Dr. Delia. All right then. I don't see any question appearing in the chat box or the Q&A box yet. So I think I can start with my statements. As we draw this webinar to a close, I wanted to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of the attendees for being part of this discussion. Remember, the power of blended learning combined with the innovative resources provided by Jove open up new possibilities for educators and students alike. I also wanted to extend my sincere appreciation to our panelist, Dr. Delia, who has generously shared her time and expertise with us today. Yeah, your contributions have been invaluable. Lastly, keep an eye on your inbox for a follow-up email with the resources and information related to today's webinar, including a recording of this session. Thank you once again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in future webinars as we continue our collective pursuit of educational excellence. Thank you everyone, and with that, I will just end the session. Thank you.